G'day, so it's back down the woods again today, and this time I brought with me an axe I've not used in a while. It's my True Temper Flint Edge double bit axe. It's on a 34-inch handle and the head's 3.5 pounds. From what I understand, this axe is probably from like the early 60s or late 50s, so quite an old one, and it's got a Forest Service stamp on it. It's in pretty good nick, and it's the only double bit I still own. I used to have a lot more double bits, but I found that they weren't very useful for me, and I decided to sell most of them, except this one. I don't know what it is about this axe, but I do really like using it. I have one side ground on it quite thin, so it cuts really nice. And the other side a little bit thicker, still thinner than a Gransfors buck, but it's not as efficient as the really thin side. I find the long handle, of course, a little bit awkward for confined space and cutting small brush. The boy's axe is a much better tool for this kind of work. It does quite well backing, but ideally for standing behind a log I prefer a short handle. I find you don't get quite the same power using a long handle because you can't use any of your body, you just have to like swing away with your arms. As you can see here, the axe is getting a little bit blunt. You can see those lines in the wood, those are tiny chips. The one thing about double bit is when you go to sharpen in the woods you can obviously stick it in a log and it holds it fairly firm. I don't really have a problem sharpening single bits in the woods, I just have a method of holding them so they're nice and secure against my leg. But, you know, it is kind of handy. This is of course a double-edged sword because now when you stick an axe in a log you can't bury the edge and keep it like safe from people walking into, whereas a double bit, if you stick it in a log there's always one edge pointing up. When I'm filing I like to file fairly flat on the cheeks so I'm almost scratching the eye, just a little bit raised up, and then I'll draw file along the edge and just lightly hone it. You can of course use stones, but I've found in general it doesn't really make too much of a difference. The very edge I obviously make that a little bit steeper, makes a secondary bevel. For working X's I don't really feel the need to use any kind of measuring device. You just do it by feel, and then you go and chop, and if it doesn't feel quite right, stick it back in the log, adjust it. You can see how flat I'd like to file my primary bevel, and then the secondary bevel is a little bit steeper. The other edge is a bit more convex and a bit steeper for rougher work. It's still very sharp, of course, and can cut, but the main edge is the one I use mostly, unless it's like a really knotty bit or got dirt or grit on it. I think in general, like, this kind of work is pretty typical of what you might consider using an axe for, which is cutting up small trees, cutting off branches, and just light work. Anything heavy, and you'd ideally want a chainsaw. So for that context, I don't think a double bit is the best tool. I much prefer a boy's axe for this kind of work. Well, you can do it with a double bit. The second edge really isn't giving me much advantage, and it's just increasing the danger. A lot of the work you do cutting small trees can sometimes be with using the axe one-handed, or you take one hand off the axe to drag brush out of the way, and this other edge is often in your way, and I found that I was often putting the double bit down out of the way so I could drag brush back when I wouldn't with a boy's axe, because say I was dragging that brush and I tripped up, there's much more danger of falling on a double bit. So now I'm cutting up some heavier wood. This log was in a really awkward position. It was crowded in by holly, and I didn't have much room to swing. I cleared it out as best as I could to give me enough room. Of course, with a longer handle you have to do a lot more clearing out to give you the room to swing the thing. But it's a good axe for heavier wood. The 3.5 pound and the long handle mean that you don't actually need to put much effort in to get some decent head speed and power into the axe. And I found that, well, not going like full force, just more relaxed, I was able to swing for a long time without even really breathing heavily. It's a lot less tiring to use than like a really heavy head on a shorter handle. So I often do prefer a heavy head on a shorter handle for utility. I find that it's a bit more useful. So cutting the log top down like this is very inefficient. You have to cut a much larger notch. To break out those chips is a lot harder because the chips are a lot bigger, and if you can, you really don't want to be doing this. This was one of the occasions where the log was in such an awkward position. It's got on a bit of a slope in confined space, so I couldn't stand on top of it, and I couldn't cut it by standing behind it either, because it was suspended off the ground slightly, a bit too high. It's like up at my sort of knee height. So on this occasion I decided to cut it from top down. When you're cutting top down like this, you often have to cut a first notch and get a third or halfway through the log and then widen it. You can't bust out a chip that's like over 20 inches wide. So once you get your first notch, then you'll go back and widen it. And then you just keep working away, putting in a line of cuts and severing all the fibres along until it busts out. Anyway, so I do quite enjoy this double bit axe, but it's something I take out rarely for a reason. Often a boy's axe or a medium single bit is a much more effective and efficient tool. Not to mention safer to use. Now I made a lot of diagrams showing the different techniques and how that cutting 2 notches is more efficient than 1. Of course the context matters, and I cut the logs all these different ways depending on the hazards, how the log's positioned, if it's suspended off the ground or there's tension and compression in it. All these things are something I analyse for what technique is the best to use, and an experienced axeman will use all different techniques. But to say that an axeman should only ever use one, so cutting top down and you're not allowed to stand on logs, I think that's a bit foolish. It's something you've got to determine whether you're experienced enough to do, whether you've got the correct safety equipment, and whether you want to take the risk. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.